So to start with examples, as Clay always did, there's two kinds of disruptive innovation. One is classic disruption, which is a cheaper and worse performing innovation, which seems really paradoxical, that eventually gets better over time and overtakes the market. The second is called a new market disruption, which reduces the money, skill, and access required to do a job. And Clay wrote extensively about the first, which we call classic disruption. This new market disruption is a little bit more of a modern day observation, I'll say, that's been made, and one that I think is actually very important in terms of what's happening in both medicine and religion. For some background in classic disruptive innovation, this is a chart that Clay would often draw to explain how this worked. Performance steadily improves over time, and incumbents like GM, Chrysler, and Ford in 1965 were adding on larger engines and bigger tires and bigger fins and making cars much fancier and making them look much better and go faster. And around the same time, Toyota first launched a vehicle in the United States. And it was aimed at people who may otherwise just take the bus or buy a used vehicle. So this was a very cheap new vehicle. And by most standards, it wasn't as good as anything that was coming out of Detroit, but it was way, way cheaper. So it fits the criteria of cheaper and worse. But over time, what happened was the Toyota production system, which was the innovation of Toyota, created a cost basis to manufacture a car that over time improved at a very low price point, and they were able to create cars eventually that were highly competitive with GM and Chrysler. But by the time they did that, they were so big that the big incumbents couldn't destroy them. And now you know Toyota today as one of the largest car companies in the world, and they make things as beautiful as the Lexus. But they were able to enter the market in a way that GM, Chrysler, and Ford didn't even take them seriously. And that's the insight. If you start out in cheaper and worse place, no one bothers to even worry about you because you don't feel like a threat. And over time you get better, and eventually by the time you are a threat, you're too big to, for them to just squash you like a bug. So this is classic disruptive innovation. It was written about in the book, The Innovator's Dilemma, and it's one that I think is a very insightful and very important notion for how big businesses can fail to small incumbents.
Erin, could I interrupt you, dear? We're not seeing you advance the slides. If you could, or if I could do it for you, if that would be helpful.
Sure. Am I still on the first page?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I've actually, if you want to just flash the picture of Clay.
Okay.
And then go to the next page. All right. So this is the chart that I just sort of spoke through, so you can see here how this actually worked. So we'll go to the next slide, please, Shelley. So slide 6. Thank you. So new market disruption is a different kind of innovation, and one that has not been published as much as classic disruption. But I think it's really interesting in the context of what's actually going on in the marketplace today. Classic disruption says that there are a certain number of people in the world who have enough money, skill, or access to buy a technology. And the way that the slides are jumping around quite a bit. Let me know when you're ready, Shelley.
You're ready for the next one?
No, I'm still on the slide that says slide 6.
Great, we're there.
Okay. So in new market disruption, what happens is there's a very small relative market that's being accessed by enough people that are able to afford or have enough skill or have enough physical access to the technology. And when a disruption comes along, it moves down that Pareto and says, how do I make it so that more people with less money, less skill, or less access are able to use this technology? And so what happens is things like Uber come around. And Uber wasn't actually a disruption to the consumer. It was a disruption to the world of the driver. So previous to Uber, drivers could access medallions and become taxi drivers. And this would cost $1 million, and it would take a long time, and some people would have to spend almost their entire lives paying it back. When Uber introduced their app, where anyone could become a driver just by downloading the app, all of a sudden, people who just had a car were able to become essentially taxi drivers. And so Uber created a new market of drivers to be able to provide transportation services to people. And some people call this Uberization, but this is actually what we call a new market disruption. So I'll give an example of a new market disruption that everyone's familiar with on the next page. This is in the computing industry. So when computers first emerged, they were gigantic structures that took up entire rooms, and you actually needed a PhD to use them. There were so many buttons and rolls of tape, and you sometimes even needed multiple people. I think there's 2 people standing in the room in this photo. And they were extraordinarily expensive. Over time, innovation allowed people with less money, less skill, and less access to sort of mainframe type buildings to use computers. And this was the innovation called PC. And of course, everyone is familiar with how Apple transformed the PC industry with a graphic user interface. And they essentially made it so that everyday people, you didn't need a PhD, could easily use a computer and access computing. What's recently happened is as mobile computing has become ubiquitous around the world, the number of people that are able to access computing technology has increased geometrically. And so now people in even the most remote parts of the world can benefit from online banking and being able to figure out where they can best buy and sell their goods if they're a farmer trying to get to market. And this innovation has made it so that computing is actually transforming lives all around the world in the furthest reaches of the world. And it's one of the most ubiquitous technologies that exist. So now that I've given you a little bit of a primer on what disruption is, I actually wanted to take you through some of the parallels that I've been observing in the healthcare space as it relates to religion. And I've picked a few different topics, but I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on this. So I'm gonna sort of breeze through these and then turn it over to Q&A. So Shelley, next slide, please. So we're gonna start with sacred space. In healthcare, sacred space, are you seeing the page with the hospital?
Yes.
Okay, because it's showing something different on my screen, so it's a journey for me here. So the hospital is something that has always been sort of a temple of medicine. It's a place where you go when you're sick, and it's a place of healing. And this is the new Penn Pavilion in Philadelphia that's currently being built. And if you don't see a temple when you look at that, I don't know what, what you see. It is a glorious structure that is a, you know, an homage to medicine. But it doesn't serve everyone. And you need to be able to access that building. You need to have the right kind of insurance and enough money to be able to be served there. And you also need to be able to know how to navigate the health system, which is sometimes a little hard for people, knowing when to go in and be seen. There's innovations that are happening in the marketplace that are essentially moving people into other types of settings to receive care that are a little bit more approachable, a little bit easier, and far lower cost. So the emergence of the retail clinics has been one of those moves. And here's an example of a freestanding clinic that you can literally just walk into and get urgent care services. Another is how telemedicine is actually driving access to care from the comfort of your own couch. And so if you're experiencing a sore throat, your baby has an ear infection, you can simply download an app called Doctor on Demand, take a picture of your insurance card, and see a doctor for about 40 bucks. These innovations are making it so that more people have access to healthcare than ever before. Similarly, in the religious context, you can go to the next slide, Shelley. We see the same walk from temples erected as beautiful and gigantic as this rendering here in the lower right, to drive-through services that are serving people on the go as they need it, to now pop-up prayer and having spiritual sites and sacred sites wherever you need them. And so there's parallel disruption happening in the way that healthcare is moving outside of the temple as well as religion. Go to the next slide, please. Similarly, in authority. So a doctor is someone who has a degree, has gone to school for 8 to 12 years, and that degree means something. I've seen people have these posted on their walls that say, "Do not confuse your Google search with my medical degree." But what's interesting about that is more people can now access health information than ever before. And I think that's actually a good thing. It doesn't mean that Google replaces your medical degree, but it does mean that more people have access to medical knowledge that doesn't just rely on going and seeing one expert. And what we're seeing in terms of disruption is that people are now being sent to, in some cases, AI interfaces. This is a buoy app that does diagnosis using artificial intelligence. And it uses the same clinical ontology and diagnostic hierarchies as doctors are trained in by asking you what's going on with you, and then it drives you to a diagnosis and then recommends places that you might go and receive care. So we're seeing now that you may not have to go and physically see a doctor. You may be able to do a Google search or download this app on your phone and try and figure out what might be going on with your body. Andrew Lee is the founder of Buoy, and here's a quote from him at the top here. "We don't have enough doctors," is what he's basically saying. And we're not going to get enough doctors by doing more medical training. We need a disruptive innovation that reduces the money, skill, and access required to get at medical advice. And what I really like about Buoy is they started out pretty scrappy. They could only do a few different diagnoses, and over time they're getting much better. And they're partnering with different types of health plans and employers to help people better triage their care than Google searching something and deciding that they have something much more serious perhaps than they actually do. And go to the next slide. In religion, we're also seeing a disruption happen where it used to be that the clergy were highly trained, highly educated people. We're now seeing disruptions happen where someone can become a minister and perform a wedding ceremony after about 10 minutes of training. We're also seeing innovations happen such as echo prayer that help you get the spiritual guidance that you need to get that fulfillment in your life that you might have otherwise only gotten from a medical professional. And so we're seeing, again, a parallel happen in how disruptive forces are shaping religion versus healthcare. Next slide, please. Orthodoxy. So orthodoxies are widespread in medicine. And clinical orthodoxies are oftentimes developed through who trains you as a physician and what you should do based on quality standards and recommendations from professional societies. There's an organization called AHRQ that actually tells you what you should do for different types of patients at different times within care settings. And these become the highly tested, validated standards by which care should be delivered with high quality. We're also seeing a new emergence of non-drug-based prevention and treatment of disease in the space of alternative medicine. And this is being practiced by not just physicians, but other types of practitioners who are developing expertise in this space. And the orthodoxy is shifting from something that is blessed by a very small and highly educated group of people to one that's starting to take into account how different traditions have treated conditions and how the natural world has provided therapies and cures for a very long time, and starting to recognize that maybe those things can also be helpful in managing and caring for people that aren't necessarily to the rigidity of the clinical standards. We're also seeing a lot more access to things that help with prevention and continuous monitoring of conditions and diseases that you don't even need to see a professional to use. Your Apple Watch can do a tremendous amount of biostatistical computing on your body, telling you how your heart rate variability is working, when you're ready to work out, how your blood pressure is doing, and many other types of vital signs that were previously only accessible to people in care settings. And this data isn't necessarily being shared with professional physicians or even professionals at all. You might just be monitoring it yourself and doing self-diagnoses and self-monitoring. So we're seeing a shift in the way that the orthodoxies of how healthcare is even administered to people changing. Next slide, please. And similarly, we're seeing differences in how religious orthodoxy is emerging in the world, where it used to be that a set of books that created laws for how you should live your life and the way that you should do things was knowledge that was absorbed and pushed out into the world by very trained and highly skilled individuals, much like the clinical standards that AHRQ publishes. But as innovation has pushed things up Pareto and towards people with less money, skill, or access to be able to do the job, something as simple as just reminding you, what would Jesus do, could be a way to think about how to live a life that is still in line with a lot of the views, but maybe is much easier to access for many people. Next slide, please. And then finally, I'm going to go into belonging. So belonging to a care system. Most of us have health insurance or have the ability to access health insurance at some level. And being part of a health insurance actually makes you a member, where you're able to access care from certain types of providers and certain types of hospitals. And you carry this card around, and that entitles you to certain types of benefits. We're seeing a disruption happen in the care system around what it means to actually receive care by belonging to something. This is a picture of Roman's product. Some of you may have heard of Roman on TV. Roman is a men's health brand that operates outside of the traditional insurance models and allows access to things that are prescription drugs, that previously you could only get by going and seeing a physician. Roman allows you to do a telemedicine chat to assess appropriateness for therapy and allows you to access hair loss treatment, Viagra, and other types of prescription-based drugs for a cash pay model. And the membership model is about $25 or so a month, and you can get access to these prescription drugs outside of the traditional healthcare system through a membership in something that's very different than the traditional health insurance. These cash pay models are growing in the marketplace, and we're seeing a lot more of these pop up. There's some that are operating in the women's health space that are helping with access to birth control. We're seeing others that are doing STD testing, so you can actually do STD tests at home. And so there's this whole sort of consumerization in pockets of the healthcare system that are realizing that there's a lot more people that need to be served with less money, skill, or access than the people who are traditionally served with sort of the historic classic benefit structure. Into the next. And similarly in religion, it used to be that belonging to a religious community was something that you had to go to a physical place and shake someone's hand, and being a member meant that you were paying dues, and you may not carry a card, but you actually had belonging to something. But over time, we're seeing a disruption occur where now you can live stream services, and so you can access it without necessarily going to that physical place. Or you don't even have to belong at all, and you can just turn your TV on and watch Joel Osteen. So this notion of belonging is also pursuing a disruptive path, both in medicine and religion. So I'd like to now turn it over to the audience and hear more about your thoughts on what's happening as a disruptive force that you see in your daily life. So Shelley, I don't know if you have to unmute everybody else.
Elon has a question. Helene has a hand raised. Go ahead, Helene.
Hi. So what happens to the elite institutions, the synagogues, mosques, hospitals, traditional medical practices? Is there still a role for them, and how do they understand where they fit in the new continuum?
Oftentimes the role is still there. There's still a need to serve people that want to be served that way. I think that the interesting thing about disruptive forces is they essentially expand the market. So there's a lot more people that are not being served by those models today, and disruptive innovations often go after serving those types of individuals.
Michael.
I'm interested in the question of how disruptive innovations are usually, they work quicker and they can take over the market. There's often, or maybe always, something that they don't do as well, and how that parallels in terms of the, religion as a market.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's actually an insightful question, and one that we could probably turn around to this group. I don't, pretend to judge whether it's better or worse. I think it's a matter of your perspective, right? I think in some respects, disruptive innovation can be better and worse, and I think it really depends on what paradigm you're looking through.
I mean, I guess if I can follow that up just slightly, is not so much judging the experience that people have, or saying, there's a general standard along the way. It's that, I guess it's a question of whether or not the market recreates itself, where there's a kind of, a different kind of experience that people associate with the religious experience. Like Uber is now the way people think of getting from place to place.
Mm-hmm.
And for a while, there wasn't really any role for car services or anything else like that. Little by little, it's recarved out. I guess the question is that something that parallels to, to the religious world? Obviously, there's always going to be a place for going to the hospital. Not everything can be done, the way that other systems work, telemedicine and the rest of it. But is that true for religion, or does it really, at some point, really just lose the need for institutions as one replaces the other? But
that sounded rhetorical, and I'm certainly no expert. So I'll actually turn it around to the audience and I want to hear what you think on that question.
Is that to everyone?
Yeah, Alon.
Sorry, my hand was up actually for a different question.
Oh, okay.
So I want to give people space to respond to Michael's question, and then I'll jump in.
Okay. Anyone?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Who is this?
So this is Rachel.
Hi, Rachel.
Hi. So I actually think that this is like a really healthy question for those of us who are in institutions to ask ourselves. what do we give that is more and different than people can get from Judaism a la carte? Because you can always find a rabbi to do your life cycle event, but Judaism should be something more than just like the extreme highs and lows of our lives. So I think it's a good question for us to ask ourselves and maybe not answer really quickly.
One question I've got, Erin, this is Elon. First of all, hi, and that was amazing, and thank you. And I guess the question I'm thinking about is, there are always exceptions to the rule when it comes to a marketplace getting disrupted or a domain getting disrupted, and some domains are slower to disrupt, some are slower to rebound. But I'm curious, when you think about the traits of those exceptions, there are some, sort of very obvious, like a quote unquote superior product, where something is priced extremely high. Like Bentley is not going to get disrupted by the new Toyota or Kia that comes on the block, because Bentley is priced at a price point that is going to keep people in its segment. But so I'm thinking about, like, what are the traits? Maybe you can give a couple of examples of the products and services that have been resistant, where virtually the rest of that marketplace got disrupted.
I think any market can be disrupted. I might be extreme in my views on that. I think it's an interesting question to ask, and I'm trying to think of an example. You started out with the example of Bentley, and my mind immediately went to, how Kia has moved up market. It used to be a tin can with wheels, and now Kia is making the Telluride, which is a beautiful vehicle. It's not the status symbol of a Bentley, and if that's the job you're trying to achieve, maybe that's not going to be what disrupts Bentley. But would another status symbol disrupt Bentley? It might. It might mean more to have some other type of status symbol in the future than having a car that has the flying bee on it. It's hard for me to think of a market that hasn't been disrupted.
Yeah.
Erin, we have two questions that were typed in, one of whom has had to leave, but they will have the recording. So if I could read it for you. It was from Josh. Many of the examples you cite as disruptive are specific products rather than means of belonging to a community. Can you speak more to the latter, which arguably has far more of a communal ROI than a specific episodic one?
I appreciate that question. And I would actually turn it around as another question, which is what does it mean to have community?
There's another one. What do you see as some of the benefits of this disruption? Question, the dangers.
I guess danger is an interesting word. I think what happens when disruptive forces start to play out in the market is it changes the context in which value is being created and delivered. And I think about the experience that the Parisian taxi drivers had when Uber first came into Paris, and the images of tires burning in the streets of Paris are burned into my memory. So I think that there's dangers from the backlash, but I think it's more dangerous if we don't embrace change and understand how we can adapt and evolve, because the world's going to change around us. We can't avoid that.
Amazing. I know that
I just want to echo something, Erin, that you taught me, which is, so by the way, Erin, you have been just an incredible teacher and friend of mine over the years. And like, when we talk about who has been the greatest supporter for what Glean has tried to do over these last few years, you are that person. So just let me say thank you first and foremost for all of that. I think one thing that you've taught me is by focusing, and this, I don't want to take us as an aside, but focusing on the job rather than that sort of consumer experience or the participant experience, thinking about the job to be done. So, as because I'm on the production side and I'm trying to create community experiences and I'm trying to create experiences of belonging for my participants and constituents, I don't want to whittle down or water down what it is that I'm offering, which oftentimes it feels like that's actually what if I'm going to respond or even anticipate a disruption in my domain, that's kind of what I have to do. That's what it feels like. But what you've pushed me to do, especially in all of our offerings at Glean, and by the way, we've been disrupted, right? We were the first of our kind 3.5 years ago, and now there are 15 of them, and and we've had to adapt over the years. But what you've encouraged us to do is focus on the job that the people are trying to get done. Focus on why it is that they're bringing it. And a lot of the times we've got 10 different features, and the job, just actually getting the job done, really only requires 3 of those features. So for us, yeah, do I love having in-person retreats, and is it a wonderful thing? But actually what we found out, our participants, the ones who come in for Glean programs, that's not the number one reason why, they're hiring us or, the jobs. Anyway, that's something that you taught us and really kept us kind of focusing on that every time we, get upset about having to feeling like we're watering down or whittling down something that we're offering, and being able to really keep us focused on, actually, if you want to serve people, just understand the jobs better.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, and also for being overly generous with my contributions.
Impossible.
Job theory wasn't the central point of this talk, but it's almost hard to talk about disruption without bringing that in. So I really appreciate your push and your wisdom there. There's an outstanding book called Competing Against Luck that Clay Christensen wrote, and I actually just bought it for my whole team. We're going to be doing a book club on it. It looks like this. And it outlines a lot of the thinking that Clay taught the world throughout his career, including jobs theory. And it's exactly what Alon just spoke to, which is the job of the Bentley is maybe to get you from A to B, but it's probably also doing another job, which is a status symbol that a Rolex might replace. And so when you brought up the notion of the Bentley, my mind immediately went to jobs thinking, right? And it's almost so ingrained in the way that I'm wired now that it's a sort of fluid process. But I think it would be great to do a seminar on jobs and jobs theory in the near future, just to get into this a little deeper.
I know that we've already gone past our time, but we do have another hand raised if you have a few more minutes, Erin.
Absolutely.
Okay, Michael.
Question before, am I on, Erin?
Yes.
Okay.
You are.
You asked the question before, what is community? And obviously it's a larger question, but I just wanted to put this into the mix, because I think, I've learned not to over romanticize the idea of community. I mean, it used to be very clear to me, a religious community is different than consumers. I know that's, that closes off a lot of the insight that you're talking about, but I still think that there is a concept of community being something about, not just the price point and the question of, choosing who could be the consumer of your product. That community is a broader idea of trying to be of service to those who may not necessarily fall into that, core category. And it's about an engine that drives forward in terms of inclusion in a way that might be different than a product would do. And one of the innovations that I think is it hasn't quite taken over. But it's interesting to have Ilan on this call because this is something that we talked about some time ago, which is the idea of voluntary dues or changing the dues structure when it comes to traditional religious institutions, like particularly synagogues in this case, because it changes the consumer model, right? It changes it from someone saying, well, I'm getting less and less out of this community. If it were my gym, I would, cut down what I'm paying for it, to go into, this is a place that I want to support in a meaningful way because I know that it has to be there not only for me, but for others to play a role that is part of my communal responsibility. And I think that there is some need, I think, to think about, within the theories of disruptive innovation, what that looks like for community as opposed to just markets and consumers.
Yeah. Brilliant. Brilliant.
Thank you, everyone. Do we have any final questions from anyone? Ilan, do you want to? Ilan or Taj, do you guys want to take us home?
I would love to, but my newborn just started crying, so I don't want to subject everyone to that sound.
Oh, it's a great
so I'll leave it to Taj, but Erin, thank you so much.
It's putting the disruptive into disruptive innovation.
It's loving disruption, yes.
All right, well, thank you everyone for joining us, and especially to Erin for giving such a great and engaging talk. We hope to see you on the next one, which will be on February 18th with Khaled Keith Perry and Tamisha Tyler from Arts, Religion, and Culture. They'll be talking about some creative ways of making an organization go. So hope to see you on that one as well. So yeah, thank you, Erin.
Bye-bye, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.